That's your unconscious, your soul saying to you, this is what I want. It's trying to nudge you, to prompt you to fulfill what your mission is here in life. That's your true purpose.
Well, friends, we're back today with another exciting episode of DecaMillionaire Decoded. And today I've got a special guest on the show, somebody that I've looked into his life and I've seen how he's been impacting business owners. And it's kind of interesting. He's like a brother from another mother. He's in a different country, has a little different accent than my Southern charm down here, but we have a lot of similarities in nature. We both have been business owners. We both have been business coaches. We both are Christians. We both are outdoorsmen, but we are on a mission to try to impact business owners. And so it's my privilege today to welcome to DecaMillionaire Decoded, Mr. Paul Davis. How are you, sir?
It's great to be here, Justin, and I'm absolutely amazing. Thank you so much.
Man, Paul, before we go any further, your accent, tell the friends, where are you located right now as we're recording this show?
Yeah, I'm based over on the east coast of Ireland, in a place called Dublin. So it's the capital city of Ireland.
Absolutely. For anybody who's ever been to Ireland, it is a beautiful country. My wife and I had the privilege to spend a couple of weeks there on the west coast of Ireland. And it was gorgeous. It was gorgeous over there. So I know exactly. Been to Dublin. Went to my first dog race, Paul, and just outside of Shannon, Ireland, and watched greyhounds run on the track, and then listen to the accents of the Irish folks they're cheering on. It was a blast. We still talk about that to this day. I don't know if you've ever been to a dog race in Ireland, but it was fun to do. It was a lot of fun.
I think Ireland is the only place that you can have all 4 seasons in one day.
This is true. I think I experienced that one day. And I didn't, I've seen lots of landscapes of Ireland, but I did not realize how beautiful Ireland was. Pictures just don't do it justice.
No.
It is a beautiful country that you live in. So, man, I'm grateful to have you on the show today. So tell the audience, who is Paul Davis?
Big question. So let me start with the usual professionals anyway, first of all. So I originally trained as a management accountant, and my career was involved in going into companies and turning it around as quickly as possible. And relevant to this particular podcast, the last position I held was CEO designate of a retail chain. I took it from 43 stores to 60 stores. Took it from a negative position, negative financial, so I was making losses when I went in, had to turn it around. And it was doing about 10 million turnover. So we took that to 60 stores, brought it to 22 million. When I left, I was in a 3-year period. And the personal wealth then of the owner of the company went from 2 million to 24 million in that period. So just from a DecaMillion perspective. In terms of, that was literally the catalyst then to set up my own business in 2001 as Davis Business Consultants. And the primary focus was to help small and medium-sized businesses to grow and to scale. And I've worked with all range from solopreneurs to small, medium-sized companies to companies looking for large-scale funding. So whether it be for an IPO listing, looking to sell to VCs or to raise large-scale funding from that perspective and prepare for sale. That's the ultimate goal. And that's pretty much what I do now. But I suppose there's 2 angles. There's what I find in relation to business is you've got to work on the personal angle, the people with it behind the business, as well as the systems, the processes, the structures, everything that makes a machine run smoothly. It's both aspects that need to be worked on.
When you're thinking about the personal angle of business, what do you see that is those business owners who reach DecaMillionaire status, or those business owners who are uber successful? What is the personal angle that they hone in on that leads them to that success?
They're driven by a purpose. It's literally as simple as that. And I don't mean a purpose from the point of view of people to understand the purpose, whereby it's altruistic and it's big scale and all that, because that's what people think about when it comes to purpose. But they're never focused on the money. Never, ever, ever focus on the money. They want to make a difference, whether they want to be the maverick in the industry, they want to be different, they want to make it better, and whatever that industry might be, they want to do it better. They want to deliver an exceptional service or an exceptional product, and that's what makes them stand out. Whereas I would see a lot of business owners, and they never really reach that level of success, because they're chasing the money. So they're chasing the profits, and something suffers. So whether the people suffer internally within the company, or the product or the service suffers as well. And okay, look, I'm an accountant by background, but A lot of people that know me would know that I'm very commercially driven. I'm very lateral thinking. I eat, sleep, and drink business. It's in my blood. So, whereas you'll get a lot of accountants and they'll just look at the numbers, but not really see the story behind the numbers. So you really got to have a really good commercially focused accountant within your company.
Well, for that business owner, perhaps, who is trying to define their purpose, who's like, hey, I want to reach this status that we're talking about here. I've got a business, I'm moving in this direction, but unfortunately, Paul, I hear what you're saying, but I really need to chase the dollars right now. I really need to do that. How do they shift their mind or their thinking? I believe everything starts in our mind. I believe everything every result that we end up seeing ultimately was conceived as a vision or a thought in our mind. So how do they shift their mind thinking from chasing the dollars to ultimately chasing the purpose? What would be your advice to that?
If it's a turnaround situation and they're making losses and money's tight, cash flow's tight, well, then there's certain things that need to be done very quickly. So that's the remedial work. And once you remove the pressure for the business owner within that, so for example, one company that I went into, they had a very, very significant overdraft facility and a lot of loans facilities. And went in and literally within 4 months, that company was turned around completely from a cash flow perspective. And bottom line is the person that was head of finance was removed from the company. So they weren't really doing their job properly. So it depends on the pain that the business owner is suffering. Typically, in my experience, it's got to do with either profits, cash flow. Cash flow would be the biggest thing. But once you stabilize the actual cash flow and the profits within the business, now you can take a little bit step back further, and the business owner now can take a deeper breath, look at the business as a whole, and now you can have those bigger, wider conversations. And now you can start to discuss, okay, look at, where do you want to be positioned in the marketplace? What's your business about? How are you trying to communicate to your everybody that's involved with a business? So the local community, the suppliers, the customers, it's everybody that you're looking at. So you're looking at, bottom line is, in business terms, you're looking at strategic plan. But you've gotten the pains out of the way in order to give that breathing space to the business owner to do that.
You've used the term now turnaround twice, and I want to make sure the audience understand what a turnaround advisor is, because that's not a term that I typically would use. I know what you mean by that. So what is your definition of a turnaround advisor or turnaround agent or whatever the term you would use?
If the company's making financial losses and it's heading towards heading towards liquidation, I think you call it Chapter 11 in the US. If it's heading towards that, a turnaround specialist will be brought in order to basically turn that company back into profits. So go from red into black as quickly as is possible, and to save the company. Because it's not just about saving the company, it's saving the jobs as well. And then you can start to grow the business. So that would be the expertise that I would have had, still have obviously, but I built my career on that.
Well, I can tell by your language and that you were an excellent turnaround advisor or an agent or strategist. If we're talking about a business owner who has a decent business, really not, in dire needs, maybe it's a little stagnant or it's not growing at the rate that it perhaps could grow at, what would you advise a business owner who is trying to shift their mindset? Go back to my root question, who's trying to shift their mindset from I'm chasing the dollars because this job or this task or this client's going to pay me more money to now I need to shift in this direction for a long-term vision that's going to be fulfilling, as you mentioned earlier. How would you advise that business owner who's not necessarily in dire straits, but they just want to move into a different direction for long-term viability and success?
If they're open to it, it's just exploring what are their motivations behind what it is that they want to achieve. So most people will want to grow a business. But when you start asking the questions, okay, so what's the motivation behind growing a business? Now you start to get under the hood and find out, okay, so what is it that that's really driving them? For some, I remember having a conversation with a business owner. Again, okay, business was doing successfully, but he just wanted to grow it. And one of the biggest things, the biggest motivator, literally just, I was shocked by it, in a good way, was that he wanted to provide his only daughter with the most amazing wedding that she could ever have. And that was his whole motivation. And that for him was really what drove him. Now it's short term, But that was his motivator. But then once you start to explore, yeah, but what's longer term? What's beyond that? What's your exit strategy? What are you trying to develop beyond even you and the business? So it's a lot of it is blue sky thinking in terms of just getting them to step back and dream a little bit. A lot of business owners will, I'm not saying everybody, but a lot of business owners will think short term. So what's the turnover that we want to achieve over the next 12 months or 18 months or whatever it may be and so on. But when you start to ask them the questions in terms of, yeah, well, like, what does beyond 10, 20, 30 years look like? And that actually has a huge positive effect for them as well. Because now they can say, actually, do you know what? I don't have to think in 5-year timeframes. I can actually think in 30-year timeframes. And now that brings a completely different focus for the actual business itself.
Do you find that the owners know how to actually think in a 30-year time frame initially, or do they have to exercise that?
No, you've got to pull it out of them. Yeah. And that's where powerful questions come into play. So, and that's where, okay, so my further training would have been a background of between, and what I say to clients is I use a blend of mentoring, coaching, and consulting, because each one has a different hat. So you've got to pull that information out of clients. So in some respects, you have to give them tools in some aspects, but other aspects you got to pull their beliefs out of them. You got to see their passions, what's holding them back, their ceilings. Everybody has a ceiling, so it's what their limiting factors are. You got to pull that information out of them and see what the passions are holding them back. So that longer scale thinking and bigger scale, like one of the techniques that I use for teams, the strategic teams, is I just call it add a zero. That's all I say. And what I say to them is I give them the analogy of, and I actually get them to physically do this. I get two people to stand up in a room and holding a rope between the two of them. And I say to the rest of the senior management team, I say, look, imagine that rope is at 10 feet high. What would you do to get over that rope? And they'll say, well, look, I could jump over it. I could stand up on top of the table and jump over that way. I could get somebody to give me a leg over. So they come up with a whole load of different ideas just to get over 10 feet. And then I get them to raise that rope up as high as they possibly can. And then I ask them, okay, so now that rope is at 100 feet, now what would you do to get over that rope? And they say, well, I'll get a cherry picker, I'll get a crane, I'll pole vault over, or whatever it might be, and so on. But what they realize then after doing that is that every single thing that they've thought of to get it over 100 feet, all the strategies, the tactics, everything will apply to getting it over 10 feet. So just by adding a zero, and you get them to say, look, what if it was, some people would say, well, look, we just want to get to 1 million turnover. And that's how they think. But if you're saying, well, what about DecaMillionaire? What if we go to 10 million? Now, what does it look like? And what would the strategies and tactics we would use? But the same thing applies to getting to 1 million. And now it's asking those powerful questions that really opens the mind for them.
I've never heard add a zero. That's I like the framework on that, Paul. I may have to use that and cite you for it, because that's very impressive. I've never thought about that. Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan wrote a book called 10X is easier than 2X. Same principle that you just mentioned, but I've not heard that particular example. I love it.
I use a lot of metaphors when I'm working with clients, and I think metaphors really work because they remember them. And they just, all you got to do is just apply the metaphor. When it comes to marketing, and again, it's a lot of business owners go into, they're very inward focused. So look at, okay, so how can we improve things within the business? But they never, let's say never. I don't really like using absolutes, but what I say is, what about the customer? So how do we improve the journey for the customer? How do we look at it from their perspective and look outward, inwards? And now that changes the whole mindset within the company.
I like the statement you made. Business owners are often very inward focused. One of the things I've been noticing as of late, I'd love to have your opinion on this, is how business owners are dealing with friendship. In the light that I see a lot of business owners end up getting isolated. And I've been talking with the Think group around this, and I'm, again, interested to know from your experience if you see the same thing or what advice or to even deal with this, where business owners, they get so focused on their business or perhaps their business and their family, that they end up losing friends. They don't have the people that they can go associate with for fun, for pleasure, for de-stressing. They end up with their friends are their employees at work, which then cause problems long term. Or they try to go home, they take the business home, they're looking for friendship at home, and their family ends up hating the business. And so therefore we don't often have second and third generational business transfers. Are you seeing that through the people or through the business owners you consult? I know you got clients all over Europe and even in the United States. Are you seeing this lack of friendship or this lack of an out in business owners? And if so, what do you think causes that?
I see it slightly differently in my experience with clients. They still hold on to their friendships because they're the ones that okay, look at culture in Ireland is you go to the pub or you go to the GAA, as in the Gaelic matches and so on. So they still have their friendships from that perspective. Some fall away because when they see the lifestyle that the business owner is having, that can have an effect on friendships. But business owners tend to pigeonhole. And what I mean by that is, so they put those friendships in a box. And so what they discuss with those friends are the soccer match or the football, or in American terms might be the NFL or whatever it might be, and so on. So it's whatever their sports or hobbies is they put into that box. But they actually find it very difficult to find peers. And so what I've done over the years is I've actually developed mastermind groups whereby you bring peers together, and now they're discussing everything that they need to discuss with the business, as well as personal issues, as well as mindset, as well as everything else that goes on, and health issues that goes on for a typical business owner's life. But they're now discussing amongst their peers, whereby it's a safe environment, it's confidential, but everybody around the table has gone through or is going through or will go through similar situations or pains or struggles that those business owners have. And that now, the bonds that I've seen being created are phenomenal, and they're huge, and they last for years. But it's in a different box, if that makes sense. And they're in a different category.
It does. So I guess whenever a business owner is looking and they're saying, okay, I've got an average company. I'm looking to this future. I know I need to scale it, or I want to scale. I have this desire to scale it to ultimately, I don't think it's often ego driven. I don't think it's even, as you mentioned earlier, it's finance driven. It's more about, are they living to their true potential is what I typically see as the heartfelt tug. And so as they begin examining themselves and they're looking at, they're looking at their family, they're looking at their friends, they're looking at, you mentioned fitness, are they healthy? Are they staying active? Where might you start if you're consulting a business owner and saying, hey, we understand that you're having some disconnects, some things that aren't quite jiving right with your particular vision? Where would you start, Paul? Is it in the family? Is it in their faith? Is it their mind? Where is it that you see the root of the problem is for business owners who know they can do more, but they're just not there yet?
It's what I would call their unconscious blueprint. That's ultimately where I start. So you can look at all the systems within the business itself, but if they don't work, you can get all them working, but if the unconscious blueprint is going against it, it'll never work, and it'll never reach the potential that you're here to reach. A good number of my clients will come to me whereby the business is doing really well. They're hitting a lot of turnover, hitting good profits, throwing off good cash, but they're a mess. And they'll openly say that they're a mess. That they know that now they're the problem within the business, because now they've either hit a ceiling, or their health is a problem, or what tends to happen is, I call it, out of all the work that I've done with clients, I've identified 12 different states of being. So to explain that, people will go from a state of despair to hope to belief to knowing to mastery, and a whole load of other states of being in between that. And what I found was that when the business is doing okay, but their life is struggling, it's typically in most of their areas of life. So it could be in relationships, it could be in their personal health, it could potentially be within the business itself. So what I do is I start there. I start with their whole life, and every single aspect, and say, okay, so what is it that they want to see happening in each area of their life? Spirituality absolutely comes into play. No two ways about it. People that I've seen that are the most successful will have a sense of purpose behind them. They'll have definitely most of them won't start with a high spiritual element with me. But after, I can guarantee after a number, and it's not me forcing it on them, It's just by me asking questions, and they literally turned around to me and said, look, what are you doing? And one of the first things I'll say is, well, one thing I do is meditation. And now that I open the door from a meditation perspective. And then I show them all the results, all the benefits for doing meditation. And then they'll say, well, I don't have time to do meditation. For God's sake, I've no time in the day to do all that. And I say, yeah, but can you find 5 minutes? And they say, yeah, I can find 5 minutes. Okay, let's start with 5 minutes. Within 3 months, they will not give up doing meditation. Just won't. And they know the difference between, for them, they themselves, the business, those around them, their friends, their relationships, their spouse, their family unit, and all that kind of thing. They have physically seen the difference for them and the others around them. So they won't give it up. And that's the state that they will get into. And therefore, it's moving from a more ego-based, more personality-driven. And now they've got that connection. And it's moving now towards more, not saying altruistic, but there's an element of they want to do something bigger. They want to make a difference. They want to leave a legacy. And it's less more about making the money. They've already got that anyway. But now that's more about personal fulfillment, personal purpose. It's all those aspects that they want to bring in now to their life and to their business.
It's interesting. You just hit on one of the most painful sessions I ever had with my coach. And Paul, he looked at me and he said, and whenever you bring a coach or a consultant in our life, often we'll have them rip down the barriers. And I know you've done this with business owners yourself. And ultimately he was asking questions and he said, Justin, you're the most self-centered person I've ever met in my life, dude. And I'm like, what? Not me. Come on, man. I'm out here serving people. And he began tearing down these walls. And it came back to, why are you in business? Why does your family see you come home tired at the end of the day? What are your friends seeing? How are you taking care of this body that you're trying to, live into, this future? How are you taking care of this? And ultimately, he never even dealt with money, which is interesting. You started the same thing. Most people, business owners, they reach a certain point of like, okay, I'm here wherever here is. I'm at some level of production or some level of time freedom or some level of status, whatever the data is that they're measuring. And they're ultimately saying, I want to go from here to here. I want to go from this level to 2 or 3 levels up. And what I'm seeing is as I'm watching business owners, and we try to apply the same tactics, mindset, skill sets that guide us to current level to try to apply it to the next level. And now you and I both know that's not going to work. So as we're thinking in this, for example, Justin being self-centered and my coaching, attacking me like that, which I'm grateful for because he changed my life when he said it. But how do you help, or how do you communicate to a business owner that, hey, you're at this level now and you want a 2X or 5X or 10X or 100X, whatever the data point is, health, your family environment, your faith, whatever it may be. What is your guiding principles, Paul, to help that business owner break through that resistance they're facing to truly achieve what their ultimate desire is?
I look for the patterns and I look for the evidence. So as I said, like I trained as a management accountant, so I'll always look for the data. And what I've learned over the years is nobody can change anybody else's beliefs unless you show them the evidence. So they've got to see the evidence for themselves. So when you look back and you ask them powerful questions, like your coach did with yourself, but you ask them powerful questions, but you drill down from the point of view of trying to get them to see the evidence in their life, that the people around them can see it, but they're blind to it. And therefore now when they can see the evidence in their life, now their belief shifts. And once their belief shifts, now you're unlocking. Let me put it this way: what happens from an unconscious perspective is a quantum leap happens within the individual, within the energy field of an individual, once you break a belief. So, and there's a huge number of techniques that I'll use from that perspective. A common thing that I'll come about or find is that business owners they'll go through a pattern whereby their team are doing well, but then they'll self-sabotage. And they'll create a pattern whereby they'll find, actually, do you know what? They'll now spot one individual and start to focus on that individual, and then they'll want to remove that individual out of the company. And it's a bit like going through a feast and famine cycle. And patterns operate exactly the same way. They'll hit a turnover figure, and as soon as they hit a turnover figure, now they'll do something to self-sabotage themselves, and now they'll knock back from that. And now they've gone from, say, 20 million back down to 25 million to 30 million. And then they realize what's going on. And then they go back on doing what they were doing before in order to get it back up to 30 million, but they still keep tipping that ceiling of the 30 million. They're all patterns, they're all limiting beliefs. But when you show them that evidence and you look back over their life, you can actually see that evidence. And you can see it in relationships, you can see it in finances, you can see it in turnovers within the company. Every single area of their life, you can actually see those patterns. So once they see the evidence, now they want to change it. And no better than a business owner wanting to change their own patterns, because once they see something that they accept themselves, they want to change it. They want to improve it. That's a true entrepreneur. They want to make it better.
It's interesting. I can see why you specialize in working with firms like architectural firms, construction, engineering, with your background in accounting work and the details you're going through. For that individual who wants to change it, though, I'm just thinking about the mindset of an architect or an engineer who's very, very analytical. How do you guide them to that next action step? So if someone's sitting here saying, hey, Paul, I hear you. I understand I have some weaknesses. I see these patterns, as you said, this evidence in the past. I know where I'm at, but what's my next step? How would you answer that?
I suppose it depends on the context in a lot of situations. What comes to mind, one of my first protocols when I'm working with a client and I take them on for the first time is I bring them through a methodology which I've created over 2 decades. And that methodology is to find out what their innate genius is. And ultimately, it's what their life purpose is. So their innate genius elements is their genius role, is their genius inspiration, their genius drivers, and their genius quest. So it's those 4 elements, and then I tie in with a genius pendulum. Their genius drivers is what gives them fulfillment. What absolutely gives them the excitement, the zest, the joy for life. That's what they want. Their genius quest is their mission in life. It's what they're here to do. It's now when you bring the intention of what they're here to do into the business completely transforms. Their genius role, genius role is like an archetype. So think of it this way. So as a business owner, you're wearing multiple different hats all the time. But we move away from our unconscious genius role. And again, the reason why I use genius, just for our listeners, the origin of the word genius comes from Goodbread, which is the innate ability that we were born with. So every single individual has an innate genius. All I'm doing is looking for the evidence in a person's life to pull that genius out. So when we find out what the unconscious genius role is, or the genius archetype is for the individual, and we get them focused on what they're doing. Everybody thinks that because they're a leader, because they're the CEO of the company, that they have to be the leader. No, absolutely not. You don't. So there could be a different type of, they could be a pioneer, for example, and they could be an artist. So it's aligning them to the genius role that they were born with. And then there's the genius inspiration. Most people say, well, find your why. Find your why doesn't work because they're trying to work it out from a conscious perspective. And it's not the God-given divine inspiration that somebody was given. And inspiration, again, comes from the origin inspirare, which is the breath that is breathed in, which is divine guidance. That's what I'm connecting the individuals with. That's my first starting point. That's literally, so once we got all of those, that's your unconscious blueprint. And now we look at a business and say, okay, look, now what do we need to do with the business and all the structures around the individual in order to align the individual to each one of those genius elements. So therefore now they've become more in, I'm not saying people misinterpret this word, but it does become more effortless. But they assume that, there's no effort in it. Yes, there's effort, but it's effort from the point of view of something that they absolutely love to do. So now, yes, there's effort. There's always effort involved in something. And trying to have a one-sided view of life whereby everything's paradise and everything is easy, and that doesn't exist. That's, it's the biggest cause of problems for people. There's always both sides, as one of the universal laws, the law of duality. So once you align the individual to each one of those elements, now that's a completely different conversation that any business owner has ever had before. But now you're opening up to the conversation in terms of building their confidence, looking at their patterns, looking at their beliefs, looking at, okay, what's actually holding them back. Now that it opens up that conversation, and now you've got, carte blanche is not the right word, but it's more, you've built the trust with the owner because now they see the evidence. They completely accept it. It's not somebody telling them this is what their genius is. They've seen I've unearthed the evidence for them. And now they can say, all right, this makes complete sense. how do I make the best version of me in this world? And they're the kind of conversation that you start to have.
I'm going to double click on that statement you said, that start with why and why that doesn't work. Because I thought, Paul, that I was the only lunatic in the world who's ever said that, and so I'm glad to know that there's somebody else out there saying this, because I agree 100% with what you stated. But I want to come back, and because I know what the listeners' ears just did when you made that one statement, because my ears perked up. I want to circle back around that, because I think that that nugget in the middle of your explanation, which I agree 100% with, that nugget is life-changing. So let's circle back to your statement of, some people say start with why, but that doesn't work. I want to circle back around, and I want you to explain that one more time, dive a little deeper, because it's powerful what you said. I don't want the audience to miss that.
Yeah, I actually wrote an article on this one, and there's a few different angles that are going to dispel a lot of myths about when it comes to why. First of all, people don't buy your why. They don't. They buy the results. They buy the outcome. And I've done this in workshops, whereby you could have 100 people in the workshop, and I'll ask them, okay, so what I'll ask them to list out all, maybe say the last 3 or 5 things that they bought, and so they list them out as a big purchases. And I say, okay, so what's the name of the company? What's the brand name of the company? And so they list that out as well. Okay, so why is that company in business? And they can't answer it. They literally don't know the why. When you understand human behavior, which I've done a huge amount of research over the years on in relation to human behavior, what you'll find is an individual will only do something when they perceive that there's more benefits to them than drawbacks. So therefore, they are ultimately only doing it for themselves. So people don't buy your why. The why is important because you're trying to build a team around you, and therefore they need to be involved in, okay, so why are we doing this in the first place? So that's when you're building a team. But when it comes to your own personal why, people try and think it out from a conscious thinking perspective. So the premise of the question is, why do you do what you do? So they're trying to work it out. Okay, so why do we do what we do? And they're trying to figure out typically the 5 whys in terms of, okay, why do we do this and why do we do that and so on. So they keep drilling it down. But their conscious mind is trying to find the answer to it. Nothing from an inspiration perspective comes from your conscious mind. Nothing, absolutely zero. And I can prove this, and I can even prove this on podcasts. So that's one thing. But the flip side of it is they're trying to apply a why to what they're currently doing. But the question is, what if you're currently doing is not what you're supposed to be doing in the first place? Now you've got a completely wrong why.
That's right. Inspiration,
as I said, comes from inspirare. It's the breath that was blown in. It's the divine breath that was given. So an individual, to define inspiration happens when somebody has witnessed something, observed something. It could be a piece of music that they listened to. It could be an event that they were attending. It could be a piece of art that they were looking at on the wall. It could be anything. It could be a video or anything that they were watching or a movie. And they've had an overwhelming emotional response to a particular aspect of what they were observing. So, for example, if it was a video that they were watching, and in a particular moment in that video, they've had an overwhelming emotional response in a good way. So it's typically joy, love, is wow, it's awe-inspiring. That's the kind of emotional response. It's always a positive emotional response. And every single individual experiences that. You can't create it. So even if you were to consciously try and think of it, you can't create it. That's your unconscious, your soul saying to you, this is what I want. It's trying to nudge you, to prompt you to fulfill what your mission is here in life. That's your true purpose. And now that inspiration is giving you an indication of what you are here to achieve. That's your reward. That's your outcome. So that's when it comes to purpose, that's what inspiration is. And that is absolutely huge. And I can do that it's my recent book. It's in the online program that I do it in workshops. Every single individual will be able to identify those moments in their life where they've had that emotional response. And now when we drill down into it further and what it represents and so on, now they get a better understanding of what actually drives them forward, what gives them the inspiration to do what they do.
Let's talk about that new book, because I think inside the book, you're covering many of the things we're talking about here. So what was your inspiration, using your word, for the new book? And what do you hope that somebody's going to glean from this writing as they read this and hopefully apply it to their business as owners, et cetera?
The new book it's my third one. It's called Genius Unlocked. Over the decades, I've been working with clients on a one-to-one basis. And so part of me in Ireland, I was born the seventh son of a seventh of a seventh. I'm in Ireland, that a huge amount of folklore around that. I'm highly intuitive, is how I work with clients. Hence the reason why I have a 100% success rate in turning companies around. What I was doing with clients was trying to uncover what their true unique life purpose was. And what was their unconscious blueprint? What was getting them to do what it is that they should really do in this life, given the intuitive, the insights, the knowings, the visions and the images that I would receive. And what I was doing was matching the evidence of my clients' lives to the insights and the intuitive, because again, that's the analytical inside of me, is again looking for the evidence. I was getting so much success with the clients. Then I developed an online program, again, called the same name, Genius Unlocked. And it was a video program, and people could go through it literally within half a day. And by the end of the day, they'd have all those genius elements and know what their true life purpose is, which is very, very different to what everybody else talks about on life purpose. Because people talk about, complete your ikigai, follow your passions and so on. None of that, absolutely none of it is to do with your life purpose. So developed an online program that went worldwide. And again, the results that clients got was absolutely phenomenal for them. Because they all said it resonated on a very, very deep level, on a soul level. They got a level of clarity and certainty that they'd never achieved before in their life. And that for me then, okay, so I could only reach so many people with the online program. So I said, okay, let's turn it into a book. So I turned it into a book that was released only about 2-3 weeks ago. And that way for me is to, again, try and reach as many people as I possibly can before, by the end of my lifetime anyway, and perhaps hopefully beyond as well. So the whole reasoning behind it was literally purely just to reach more and more people. And for people that will read the book, they'll know that there's so much within the book that I hope they gather from it, because it's well within the book itself. I don't. It's not for the money. Absolutely not for the money. It's the more people, and I suppose what I explained in the book is, the more people we can get on the right track to fulfill what their life purpose is, especially the way the world is right now at the moment, the ripple effect of that is phenomenal. And hence the reason why I'm trying to reach as many people as possibly can.
Absolutely. Well, friends, we're going to put a link on where we can buy the book in the show notes here. So I would challenge you to pick up the book. I'm looking forward to reading this, Paul. I love this title, Genius Unlocked. And I love the premise on where you're going through. I've often said that why is a dangerous path to walk down, especially for the owner. I get it for the business. I understand it for the business in context, but not for the business owner. And following your passion is such a cliched statement that is much more than that. It's what God's placed in our lives and how we're supposed to fulfill his mission for our lives ultimately. So as we're wrapping this up and we're thinking about these business owners and they're looking and they're saying, okay, I'm growing my company. At some point in the future, though, I'm going to exit my company. I'm going to transition this business from myself to my children, from myself to another buyer, perhaps the employees, whomever. What's one piece of advice that you would give these business owners who are trying to move upstream in their life with regards to an exit?
Plan now. It's the first thing that comes to mind. A lot of people leave it till the last minute. And they kind of say, well, look, they assume, especially when it comes to family businesses, they assume one of the family members is going to take it over and they're going to be as good as what they were and all that kinds of things. And most family businesses fail on the second generation. So the first thing that comes to mind, honestly, Justin, is plan now and have a backup plan. So if you think you're going to leave it to a family member, no, have another backup plan. But if you... I suppose it gets back to the lens of if you're looking through the lens of, say, 10 years down the road or 15 or 20 or 30 years down the road, and you start now with the intention that you're going to sell it or you're going to pass it on from a succession point of view, or you're expecting somebody to buy it over, you're going to merge with another company, whatever that exit strategy is, if you start now and it happens to be 20 years down the road, you can never start too early. Never. When it comes to an exit.
Paul, thank you so much for your wisdom today. Thank you for everything you shared. Friends, I got to tell you, we just had a master class on accelerating businesses. And I've already looked at Paul's website. We're going to put a link in the show notes for his website, as well as I'm looking forward to reading this book. I would challenge you to buy the book. I would challenge you to follow Paul. We're going to have a link to his LinkedIn account. And I've already seen some very powerful posts that he places out there. So Paul, thank you so much for impacting our business owners. I love your heart, brother. I love how you pour in. It seems like I said earlier, we're brothers from a different mother. We're on different sides of the world, different parts of the world, but we have the same mission. And I just want to tell you thank you from my heart for coming in and sharing and being vulnerable, but also, stepping in and saying some things that often will not go with the mainstream business world right now. And I agree with you on much of what you said. So thank you so much for joining us today, Paul.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you so much.
Friends, until next episode, y'all stay tuned. We'll see what's next.